In this episode, we sit down with Ryan Gadbsy. Ryan's resilience to overcome his childhood trauma and experiences from the past and use it to help other people that have been in similar situations to him is nothing short of inspiring. I hope this conversation reaches many people because I know that it will help people that have experienced what Ryan has experienced. This episode is not to be missed. I hope you enjoy it. Ryan, thanks very much for joining me, mate. I'm intrigued. Your Instagram handle is Edge of the Bed. Why is that?
This is like such a common question that I get, and I think it does have intrigue behind it when people learn what my story is about, and obviously we're going to get onto that. But the edge of the bed for me, it has two split meanings. One of them's a bit deeper than the surface meaning. But when I first filmed the podcast, I was sat on the end of my bed. So that was one of the reasons. And the other reason was it relates to the sexual abuse that I went through as a child at the hands of my stepdad. And a lot of it would happen in my bedroom on the end of the bed after school before my mum got home. So the deep meaning that I don't really talk about that section a lot, or that meaning behind it, that side of it. But yeah, that's what it means. Wow. And I feel like it's such a statement when people come onto the page because they have that question.
Yeah.
Like, oh, the edge of the bed, sexual abuse, what? Like, such a like, what could it mean, or
the curiosity.
Yeah. So I like it like that, and I like that it brings the dark side of the issue that people can't see, that don't experience it, to the front. Yeah, they sort of see it up front, and they're exposed to that imagery, I guess.
Definitely, 100%. And what I love about your story, and I know I just touched on this, is that very similar to myself in that I found light in such a negative thing with losing my brother to suicide. And obviously looking at your story and following you for the length of time I had, is that you've done the exact same thing. It's just a different situation. And I respect that so much. When is it that you opened up about the events that happened in your life?
So when I first told anyone was on the day that I planned to take my own life when I was just 16. And following the sexual abuse that ended when I was around 12 or 13, my stepdad began to physically abuse me and emotionally abuse me. And it took me into like a dark spiral where I felt trapped. And with the shame of the sexual abuse and the fear that I had for him hurting me, I was trapped and I was stuck in that situation. So the only way out for me felt like suicide. I felt like that was the only option I had. You know, when I reflect back, you know, as an adult, I can see other options there, but that's the thing when when you're in depression or in that dark space, you don't see the other ways out. And it's very easy for someone to sit and reflect now and say, you could have done, oh, why don't you just speak to someone at school, or why don't you just, it's not like that for people who are in that space. So I first told someone over the phone I was about to end my own life. I'd planned it all out. I'd written suicide letters for my mum, for my family, and I stood in the bathroom ready to do it, and then my phone rang. So I answered, and it was a friend, and it just came out. It's like I didn't have any control. It's like in that moment I was just in some sort of panic, and I just said like, oh, this has happened to me when I was younger, just blurted it all out. And then I made a plan to sort of go to the police station. So I was supposed to be at work later that day, but my abuser always took me to work. So I knew I'd have to get in the car with him. And it was hard for me in that moment or that time for me to keep that feeling in because of how crazy that day felt. And so I got out of the bathroom after I'd revealed this and got ready for work as normal. And then I was like, went downstairs, got in the car with him, and I was just silent. And I remember he said he was quite aggressive with me that day, and he was kind of saying that I seem really sad and down and I need to start lifting up because my mum's going to start becoming suspicious about things. And I was, it just made me more and more sort of down or riled up kind of. And he just kept going. I remember it felt like the longest drive ever. It was only a 2-minute drive from my house where I worked. And he's just sort of like drilling that into me. You need to, just like he always did, you need to perk up. Your mum's going to start getting suspicious about things. She's going to start asking questions. Why is Ryan so sad? Why is he not going to hear you now? And all this sort of stuff. And then we pulled up outside, and I just said to him, like, oh, I'm not going to keep your secret anymore. And it's the first time that I'd ever said your secret. And it's also the first time that I'd ever spoke about what had happened to him directly in a way that wasn't, we had like sort of code names and things like that for it, but I just came out with it there and then, like, I'm not going to keep your secret anymore. And I remember he said, like, stop it with this attitude, Ryan. And he like went red and he was like really angry. And so I opened the door and I managed to get out, and he tried to grab my top and pull me back in the car, but I managed to shrug him off. And I shut the door and walked towards, and I could just see him in the background going like, it's like, get here now, type thing. And that's the last time I ever saw him. And then I went into it was a McDonald's where I worked, and I went into the toilet and I just started crying. But it wasn't for the reasons that you would think. I felt bad for him, this is what will confuse a lot of people watching. And this is one of the messages that I stress a lot, and I will get into it more. I felt guilty for him, and I felt so sorry for him because he was my dad, you know? Even though he was my stepdad, he'd been my dad since so young that attachment was there, and that relationship doesn't go away just because of what he did at that time. Obviously, as I got older and I understood abusive tactics and how these people worm their way into families and do this, it's easier to detach from those emotions. But in that, I was so sad that I was losing my dad and that he was going to go to prison potentially. So after that, after I broke down in the toilet, I walked around and there was a police station just next door to where I worked, which is ideal, isn't it? But I just walked into there and then a police officer greeted me, and the first thing they said to me was, you might have to come back tomorrow because we don't have enough officers in today, or something like that, or the correct officers. And I was kind of like, what? Like, I know for a fact, due to some of the events that had happened and the type of person that I knew he was, and that you'll learn that he was, that if I would have gone back that day, I would have been murdered. Like, there's no doubt in my mind. He was in a state there where he would have protected himself over anything. And I knew how violent he was and how he didn't show any empathy for me as a young child throughout all those years. I knew he would be capable of that, and I said that to her. And it was kind of like, well, it was a guy actually, and he was kind of sort of took back and he was like,
didn't know what to do.
All right then, yeah, I'm going to have to find someone. So then these two other officers, which were amazing, came down and just got me into this room and just asked me like, well, what's the allegation that you're making? And it was so hard for me to get it out of my mouth, like, oh, it's sexual abuse. Like, I didn't really know, like, sexual abuse, I think. And they was like, all right then. And then they took me to a specialist centre, and I did a 4-hour recorded interview detailing in deep depth everything that had happened that I could remember, which was quite traumatic within itself, all of that happening in one day. And this is one of the issues with, you know, the justice system for survivors. But yeah, that was an experience, just to a complete stranger, explaining my deepest, you know, darkest secret that brought up so much shame and anxiety and guilt and all of those things. And then I remember the two officers that originally spoke to me came back in and they said, oh, we're going to arrest him now. And like, that feeling was like, oh no, it's like, it's actually over. Like, it is over. I've done it. I've managed to break out. And I remember there was a bit of uplift there, and I was kind of like, you know, things might be all right here, which was so different to earlier in the day where I was like, this is my last day on earth. So it was such a like day of like, that day was traumatic within itself despite the experiences. But yeah, they went to arrest him, and I didn't see what happened from here, but from what my mum told me, the police knocked on the door and they asked for Andrew, that's his name. And then they came inside and they said, we've had an allegation of sexual abuse against you, so we're going to have to arrest you. And read his rights and all that stuff. And he was like kicking off and getting high rate and stuff, and he was like trying to be a bit cocky with the police officers. Were
you still at the police station at this point?
Yeah, I was still sort of doing my interview and then finishing it off, and that sort of thing, as this was happening at the same time. So he was like being cocky with the police officers, and he said, oh, I need a jumper, it's too cold, I need a jumper. So they was like, oh, okay, go and grab a jumper. And then apparently he was just like on purpose, like taking his time and like just taking the mess out of him a little bit. So I think my mum thinks that one of the police officers got a bit agitated and then said to her, it's Ryan that's made the allegation, it's your son Ryan that's made this allegation. And my mum just went crazy then at him and just started screaming at him because that's the first time she's heard it.
Yeah.
She you know, I'd never mentioned anything to her.
Do you think that she ever had any idea at all?
This is like another big question that I get, and it's hard because the thing is with abusers is they groom the family, the child, and the community, and that's what I think people struggle to understand as well, who haven't seen it happen in front of them. I think my mum was very vulnerable when they met. We came from quite a deprived background. We lived in Highfields, which is a deprived area of Doncaster, and like I have memories of, you know, we got kicked out of our house because mum couldn't afford to pay. This was before we met my stepdad, before I was 8. You know, so she was very vulnerable, and she started going to the church where we met him, I think for a sense of community. And people like my stepdad, abusers, they look for them vulnerable parents. It's like the whole procedure that they do. It's like they look for a vulnerable parent with kids. So it's hard to say if she would have. I don't think she would have known, because I think my mum would have always come in and stopped that happening, of course. And I just think she was vulnerable, and she didn't know the signs, and she wasn't educated on the issue, and that's what empowers me today.
Sure.
Because I know my mum's a lovely person. Like, I've never seen my mum be mean to anyone in her life. I've never seen her be rude to anyone. She's like, she grafted so hard for us, even before we met my stepdad. She tried everything. She didn't have any qualifications. She managed to bag herself a job at a school. And she worked really hard looking after us on her own. My dad was out of the picture. My biological dad was completely out of the picture. We saw him like once, you know, Christmas and, you know, birthdays and that type of thing. And she's just supported us herself. So I know that she would have, for sure, if she would have known or had some sort of hint, she would have stopped it, I think. So I don't think she knew, but she recognised that things weren't normal, I would say. So there were certain instances where the sexual abuse would happen in the shower a lot. That's where it started, and I can get onto that. Where she'd stand outside and she'd knock and go, "Oh, is everything okay?" And, you know, it just seems like there was some hint of maybe suspicion. Maybe her mind wouldn't go to that, but yeah, that's how I'd answer that. I think maybe she thought things were unusual, but kind of just rolled with it.
The thing is as well with, obviously she loved your stepdad. You always give your loved ones the benefit of the doubt.
Exactly.
You always try and focus on the positive rather than the negative. Yeah. So I can see exactly how you've just said that. Yeah,
and this guy was not like a normal guy. Like, he was a master manipulator, and he groomed everyone in the community. To give some insight, you know, we met him at a local church when I was 8 years old. He started to build a relationship with my mum. Within, I want to say 6 months, we were moved in to his house.
Wow.
Yeah, within 6 months we were moved in.
Is it just yourself, or do you have siblings as well?
I have a sister called Megan. So
older or younger than you?
Older.
Okay.
Yeah. And we were moved into this house, and then they were married within a year. Yeah, so less than a year they were married. Wow. So he'd really swooped in and got himself wormed in with a family like that. That's a lot, isn't it? To have yourself and your sister and your mum, for all of that to happen within 12 months. Yeah. That is a lot. Yeah, exactly, yeah. So it's like, I remember the first day we went to his house, and being from a poorer background, he was sort of middle class. And when I went in, I was like, whoa. Like, I was just blown away with, you know, he had like a race car track, and he had a summer house and a garage and a biggish house. And like, I'm running around it, and I'm like, oh, this is going to be our home. Like, this is crazy. And he was so like, showed so much attention to me from early on. When we first met him, he spoke to me before he even spoke to my mum. So as I said, we started going to a local church where he went. And my first memory of him is him offering me biscuits, extra biscuits, because after the service they served drinks and biscuits. And he offered me some, you know, extra ones, and I was like, oh yeah, thank you. And then the next thing I know, he's getting my mum's number. And then when we move in with him, all his attention's on me. He'd do activities with me, he'd want to take me on days out, he'd want to help me with anything. And that's how the sexual abuse started. So I was always terrified of water growing up, from as young as I can remember. What do you put that down to? I don't know, you know, I don't know. I think my mum was quite an anxious person, and I think some of that fed into me because she couldn't swim.
Okay.
So I think it kind of just passed on. So I'd go to the leisure centre and I could see my mum were all anxious, and maybe that's, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that energy sort of spread to yourself.
And like even now people tell me stories like, oh, you scream the house down when anyone would try and help you in the bath or shower and that type of thing. There was only one like person who could bath me and I'd stay calm, and it was my auntie Jackie, which it gets a bit confusing, but she was the woman that my dad cheated on my mum with. Okay. But then right. When everything came out and they found out about it, Jackie and my mum became best friends. Okay. And then they were sort of like, it was our auntie Jackie because it was my mum's friend.
Right.
Even though it was the woman that my dad cheated on my mum with.
Okay. Right, okay.
Yeah. So it's, but we was like really close to her, and in the end she became, like, filled the role of our dad. So we would go to hers on a weekend instead of my dad's. Whenever he'd cancel on us, she'd be there. She'd come for Christmas and stuff like that. And anyway, in the bath, she used to tell me that whenever I was scared and worried, I could talk to an imaginary friend in the ceiling called Jack. And she said, just tell him all your worries while I wash your hair. And like, it's such a key memory that I have. And so, yeah, she was the only one that could wash my hair or anything like that without me panicking. And so later down the line, when the sexual abuse was happening, in the shower, when I was a young kid, I had memories of where I would do that when I was uncomfortable while the sexual abuse would happen. I'd go back and I'd talk to Jack in the ceiling and kind of just imagine it wasn't happening. Right. So I always thank my auntie Jackie for that. She's passed away now, but I always thank her that she gave me that coping mechanism, because I think I would be a lot more, I wouldn't say damaged, but affected by what happened if it wasn't for those sort of techniques of sort of,
it's crazy, isn't it? Like, you've obviously gone through a significant amount of trauma, but even prior to that, you've got something within your subconscious, even from an earlier age, from previous trauma, from your dad cheating on your mum with your auntie Jackie, and she's give you this coping mechanism that's then from that trauma helped you with further trauma.
It's crazy. It's crazy, mental. Yeah. And it's crazy how it's like the universe. So when I was first sexually abused, it happened in the shower. So obviously that fear of water allowed him to come in and say, oh, I'll help Ryan in the shower. And then that's how he was alone with me for the first time, and he sexually abused for the first time.
And how old were you at that
8 years
point?
old.
Wow.
I was 8 years old, yeah. And like I said, I went straight back to that displacing and focusing on something else. And it's like, I didn't know it was wrong, but I knew I was uncomfortable. And people would say, you know, how did you not know it was wrong? I was never told directly if someone was to touch your penis or touch their penis while they look at you, you know, that's wrong. I'd never had that direct message.
At 8 years old, though, you've never been exposed to anything like that before.
Yeah,
you're not to know, really.
Exactly. So I think people struggle to understand that when abuse survivors talk about it, because as adults we think it's common knowledge, you know, like you tell your mum that. I didn't even have a thought to tell my mum at all, like it didn't even come to mind. And obviously he'd mentioned to me, he said, this is what dads do. Obviously your dad's not been in your life, so you'd never had this before, but this is just what dads do. But we keep it private. It's quite a private thing. It's like going to the toilet. You don't go and tell all your family that you've gone and, you know, gone to, do you know what I mean? Or what you've done in the bathroom. So that's how he originally got me to keep it silent, even though it didn't concern me at all. You
can see the master manipulator coming in.
Exactly, yeah.
Even just from saying that one thing about keeping it private, because obviously you know better than I do, but you can imagine that without that statement, keep it private, you'd have said, oh, I went
slipped up,
something happened in the shower with...
Yeah, or maybe, oh, remember what you did in the shower? Or, you know, like kids slip up with those things. Like,
you'd have said that in front of your mum, you might have been like, what the f...
Yeah, what's going off there? Then it may have been a red flag, but...
So you knew exactly what it was doing.
But he was so... What shocks me now is his audacity. Like, he was not... I didn't get the sense that he was scared that I was ever going to speak out until that last day. There was not... He was so, like, confident in his ability to manipulate and to lie. He was a classic, like, narcissist. That's one of the things that confuses even me now, being the survivor. I'm like... I was so angry towards him. I could have ruined his life like that, but I never did. I never understood the power that I had over him because of how he manipulated me.
That's a common trait of a narcissist, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And the whole, when you look at him in the community, he'd do like fundraising events, he'd do like trips away, and he even ran the children and youth group
Had
within
this
the
ever
church.
happened with anybody else? Did it come out that he'd done this to other people?
Yeah, so there's a few stories here. So I remember as I was growing up, maybe after I was about 12, 13, I started to learn that his previous family had broken down due to some allegations that his step-grandchildren had made about him sexually abusing them.
Right.
And he'd managed to power it off to everyone as, oh, it's my ex-wife trying to get back at me, she's trying to ruin my life. And he was good friends with the vicar at the local church, and he even believed it and even defended him on that sort of thing to my mum. So my mum just kind of thought like, oh yeah, it's clearly if all these different people who are in power are telling me that it's fake and it's not real, then it's not real. It's not something to be concerned about. Another time, I must have been about 14 or 15 because I was playing football at school in the football club, and I got a phone call from my mum, and she was like, oh, you need to get home as soon as possible. So I'm like, all right. So I remember getting back as quick as I could, and then there was police cars outside and another car, and I went in. There's a social worker there and then some police officers. And before we even had a chance to say out to my mum and Andrew, they like whisked me off into the living room and sat me and my sister down. And they just said to us like, was direct, and they just said to us like, has your dad or stepdad ever sexually abused you or ever touched you inappropriately? And this would have been my key moment to speak out, right? That's what everyone
you were 14
made me think.
at this point.
14, yeah. And I knew what had happened was wrong at this point, I'll say. And I said no. I said no, he's never done anything like that, ever.
What did you put that down to, the reason why you didn't say anything at that point?
Because I cared about him.
Right.
And I loved him. He was my dad. Like, do you know what I mean? He was my dad. Like, despite, this is what confuses people, and it confuses me. He was my dad and I wanted to protect him. And so in that moment, I don't think I had the understanding and the emotional intelligence to do it, and I just don't think it was the moment for me.
Okay.
And obviously never sexually abused my sister or even physically abused my sister. It was quite emotionally abusive throughout the years, but she also said no. And then anyway, they all went and everything seemed fine. And then they told us that an allegation was made many, many years ago, maybe before I was born or when I was like really young, from a young teenage lad who used to, I think, help babysit his stepkids, Andrew's stepkids. And he'd said that Andrew had sexually abused him. And then the file got lost in the police, so they never followed up with that young lad. So he'd gone to the police station and had the bravery to go and share his story with the police about what had happened to him, then they never even got back to him. Oh. And then it turned out, when they started to investigate it all those years later, while our stepdad was living with us, that the young lad had ended his own life during those years. So he'd been completely neglected by the police and the system, but he'd had the bravery to go and share his story, and it still wasn't enough, and he lost his life.
That's
so
awful. You
know, that was nearly 2 people that my stepdad had, you know, he'd ruined like probably maybe 10, 20 lives, but he nearly took 2. He took 1 life, he nearly took 2. Do you know what I mean? So it's so dark, and I can't even imagine the pain that lad would have gone through. And, you know, it's part of my motivation today, why I do the things I do, because I think of that lad and I think, you know, not only could that have been me, but that's a survivor there, lost without anyone, didn't even have a lifeline or anything. Probably didn't even have family supporting him or anything, you know, because, yeah.
And it's the power, again, you got to take that power back, and you've gone and reported it, and it's come out, and now you are where you are. And now you're doing it for him again, which is amazing.
Yeah.
So you're not letting him lose his life in vain. You're doing it not just for yourself, but for him as well, which is,
exactly.
I love that.
And I always share his story, even though, you know.
What was his name?
I don't know his name.
Right.
I wasn't told his name. I always share his story because, you know, he didn't have that voice. He didn't get his day in court. He didn't get his justice. So I think, you know, I'll tell people what actually happened, and, you know, I guess shame my stepdad even more. Do you know what I mean? Just tell people what he was really like. And just to give you an insight even more of what he was like, on the day that he found out that the young lad was no longer with us, that he'd killed himself, he celebrated that.
No way.
He celebrated it. It was like, oh yeah, see, like, you know, because he wasn't going to have to go to court.
Fucking hell.
And he celebrated that, and it was kind of like, oh well, that one's gone then. And it just showed his character, and then to me that did some. I think that did something within me subconsciously, because I saw that relationship was that the same as what me and him was like. Do you know what I mean? Like, did he act as though he cared about him and act as though? Do you see what I mean? So I started to piece that together, I think, in my mind, because after those 13, 14 years old, I started to really struggle to live with him because of the anger and shame and those things. Even though, again, still loved him as a dad, those things were creeping in, and I was, angry towards him.
What point was it, during your journey, did you start to understand that it was wrong what he was doing?
So I would say maybe 13, 14. And I think it's the age where kids start to learn more about sex and what that is and that sort of thing. I mean, even in school you have sex education at that age.
Yeah.
So it must have been to do with that why I sort of started to begin to understand. But I remember there was a moment, and I was watching a documentary, and it was about a child that was abused in the really early years of her life, and it was exploring why she was now displaying sort of psychopath tendencies. And the documentary went into great detail into the sexual abuse that she faced, and I was thinking, like, that kind of happened to me. That happened to me. So that must be abuse then. And then that like shook my world, because in my eyes, my stepdad, or my dad that I called him, he was like the top guy. Like, I thought of him really well before that, and we was best friends. I was called the spoilt child.
Right.
That's what people called me. Like, oh, Ryan's spoilt, is the spoilt one, because of the gifts and the things that I would get in exchange for the sexual abuse that had happened. And it goes back to that like imagery we have of an abused child, isn't it? It's like you watch an advert on NSPCC and it's like a child sat in a corner like that.
Vulnerable.
Yeah, or like in some impoverished home. Whereas I went on holidays every year.
What was his job, your stepdad?
He was regional operations manager for a logistics company.
Right.
I
always wonder with psychopaths and sociopaths and narcissists and people like that, like, I know a narcissist and I can pinpoint why he is looking at his past, why he is the way he is.
Yeah.
With certain things that he does and says, etc.
Yeah.
I wonder what must have happened in Andrew's past.
Yeah.
From the point of being born to when he thought that it was acceptable to be like that. What must have happened in his brain, in his chemistry, in his social environment to make him act like that? Because when you talk about paedophiles, it's something wrong within their brain to think that isn't okay. But there's a difference between having a thought and acting on a thought.
Yeah,
because
you've got to have them intertwined. Being a paedophile is a sexual attraction to children.
Yeah.
But if you get, a paedophile that isn't a narcissist or psychopath, then they may not act on it.
Yeah.
Right, and they may go to therapy and they may get some form of mental health for that. And I think that's fine. It's not fine that they're attracted to children, but that they go and get help. That's a responsible thing to do if you're having those urges.
They're self-aware.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you get one with a narcissist or a psychopath where they have no concern for anyone else and they have those drives to abuse children, that combo is why I think abusers exist in our society. Yeah. And I think when you said, with paedophiles, something wrong with the brain, there's been research to show that paedophiles are born and their brain chemistry is shaped in that way, or in early childhood something happens that changes their brain chemistry, whatever that may be.
Yeah.
I remember a study, I'm trying to remember the neurologist that did it. He might come back to me, but he did brain scans of people who were paedophiles, and when shown imagery of just regular children, areas of the brain that would light up for, sexual attraction or sexual arousal lit up, and those that weren't paedophiles, the nurturing side of the brain and the caring side of the brain lit up. So that's an ingrained chemical, or I guess neurological problem going on that's causing that attraction. And you know, it's interesting because then it's like, what do we do with these people, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's such a big debate
Yeah.
on, you know,
It's like you can't help. You can't help the way that you feel towards somebody sometimes.
yeah.
But like you said, you can help how you act or react to certain
Exactly,
situations.
yeah.
What was there ever a conversation, or was there ever anything that came to light about your stepdad, about Andrew, as to why he was the way he was?
The only thing that comes to my head with that is he said to me when the abuse was happening, when we'd get into these tiffs, when he was a bit more violent, because he, like I said, he physically abused me after 13, 14 years old till I was 16. And in those like altercations, he would say things to me like, "Oh, you think this is bad? You should have seen what my dad did to me." Do you know what I mean? So he told me that his dad sexually abused him,
Right.
and physically abused him.
Did you believe him?
I don't think I do. I don't think I do. I think he used that as an excuse, and this is sort of the thing that confuses me. So when we, again, the debate of paedophiles, like sort of what causes it, a lot of research and people say is that, you know, if you're abused, you're more likely to abuse, which in some, you know, instances does happen. But I believe it's those things that come entwined together. If you're naturally born a paedophile and then you have some sort of trauma that causes you to develop narcissism or psychopathic tendencies, which does happen, then I think that's what leads to an abuser. But also, I wonder where the statistics come from. I'm not a specialist on this, but I know that when people are arrested for sexually abusing children or for raping a woman, they usually want some sort of mitigating factor. And that usually comes from an excuse in childhood. So they'll say, "Oh, I was sexually abused as a child," and then that can sometimes work to lower their sentence or get a less harsh sentence. So if people are getting the statistics from that, it's not going to be that accurate, is it?
No.
So, yeah, it's just that big debate, and it's still something even in psychology and neurology that they're trying to figure out. Like, same with psychopaths, are they born or are they made? It's kind of...
What do you think?
I think it's an intertwine. I think it's both. I think it's nature and nurture. I think under the right conditions, like you say, if you know a psychopath, I know some people who are a bit, you know, narcissistic or a bit psychopathic, but they don't go around killing people.
No. There's a difference. People say, isn't there, that a sociopath is something that's come from your environment growing up and things that have happened, and a psychopath is somebody that's born.
That's born it, yeah. I mean, it's like I say, it's still debated. It's that nature nurture, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we're such complex beings, aren't we?
I find it fascinating, the neurological processes that go in your brain and why you act the certain way that you act and why you do the certain things that you do. But what it always comes back to is who you are today is a combination of events that have happened from when you were born until this very moment.
And your genetics and your brain structure and all those things as well.
Crazy.
So,
I find it fascinating as well. I think it's absolutely mental. And it's why I do everything that I do, because I do generally believe, like you, I'm sure you do as well, that, you know, your mindset is the number one thing that you have. And no matter what you go through in your life, no matter what traumas, adversities or challenges you face, if you always adapt the right mindset, I still think that you can achieve anything.
Definitely, yeah. And it is all up here, like, even when you're talking just, so like the impacts of sexual abuse and stuff, as I've, you know, grown up and that, I've seen those impacts myself in my relationships, in the way that I am, in like my emotional regulation and that type of thing. And like, I've developed a sort of self-awareness of, oh, that's because of what happened, I think. But I think what I would say to survivors, because I see it a lot where people do that as well, they talk about the trauma responses. I think it's important to understand the trauma, but not trauma blame, especially in your relationships. So I've noticed, you know, I have some insecurity or whatever like that, or whatever issue it may be. I can pinpoint it and I can say, right, that may be due to the trauma. But if that's affecting someone else, I'm not going to say, oh, that's because I was abused as a child. It's important. You've got to take responsibility over the effects of your trauma, which is sad because it's not your fault. It's not your fault it happened, but it is your responsibility to heal and understand
what are certain things, I know personally, something that, from what happened, the suicide of my brother, something that affects me significantly is like my partner, Amy, if I text her, and like we'll speak, like she's my best friend. If I text her and she doesn't text back, I get really, really worried, like something really significant's happened. I remember when we started seeing each other, I texted her saying you forgot something at mine, and she didn't text me back, so I rang her and she didn't answer, and I rang her and I rang her and I rang her, because that's what happened when my brother died. I was ringing him all the time, and he didn't answer. And then she lived at the other side of Huddersfield and I lived in Barnsley, and I ended up driving from mine in Barnsley to her house, and I saw her walk out the door and I just started crying my eyes out. I went, what the fuck have you been doing? She went, oh, I left my phone on Do Not Disturb. You thought your calls didn't come through. Yeah. And I was just so relieved, but I know that I can pinpoint that back to the fact that when my brother died, it was a combination of calls after calls after calls with no response.
Yeah. I'm just interested, what was her like response to that?
Oh, she was devastated because she could see how upset I was. Yeah. And she was like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I left my phone on Do Not Disturb. Like, I'm really sorry that you feel that way. Yeah. She was really empathetic towards me. She wasn't like, shut up, you idiot. Like,
see, that's good though, because I think with like, obviously people who've been through some sort of trauma, something like that, let's say if you had a partner that wasn't so supportive, could paint that in a slightly different way. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. Well, there's a reason why we're getting married. So.
Exactly. yeah. But it's like, where I'm getting at with that is, the relationships around you are so important.
100%,
for your like personal growth, especially when you've been through trauma.
Yeah.
Have a look at the people around you. Are they supporting you? It's like, communicate with people about what you're struggling with, and that's the most important thing. Then communicate with yourself what you're struggling with and why. And if it is because of the trauma, accept that and say, right, this is happening because of that. Don't just ignore it and carry on with your life, because like you say, with that headstrong mindset, you can start to work on those things and start to get better at it. Yeah. It's like, it's that saying, hurt people hurt people. If you're not processing those issues, you're just going to go on and hurt everyone that you go into contact with. Yeah. But like you say, when you have a supportive person like, you do and what I do as well, they can take on board, they're going through this process of working on those things. Yeah. And that communication, if it's strong, just helps you, work through it, and you can get to a place where you're happy. And yeah, I think with that side of things, like the hurt people, I know that the things that I feel sometimes, like whether it's like insecurity, that's one thing I struggle with, and I still struggle with. And
what is it in particular that you feel insecure
It's like anything.
About?
It's like that sort of imposter syndrome type thing. And like that causes me anger and upset, and it can cause me to be down a lot, and that's going to affect the people around me. It's going to affect my partner, Elodie.
Is it imposter syndrome within what it is you're trying to achieve, the goals that you're trying to achieve, or is it other areas of your life?
It's like every area, yeah. But it's something that what I always do, and I've had things like this crop up before, and I've worked through them, is I've pinpointed it, and I know it's due to something in the past. Do you know what I mean? And I know where it's came from, and I can recognize it in myself, so I can work on it. But I'm not going to blame it for being angry or upset at people, or do you know what I mean? I'm not going to say, like I said earlier, I'm not going to say, right, that's because I was abused when I was younger.
Use that as an excuse.
So just like accept that I'm angry and accept that I'm upset and that I'm upsetting you. When no, it's not my fault. Like, I can work through it. I'm an adult. I'm aware of it. So like, so yeah.
I think, to be honest, mate, can I just say, 22, the intellect and the articulate of how you have a conversation and how self-aware you are is just phenomenal.
Oh, thank you, mate.
No, honestly, I do. I know a lot of people, and I know people your age, but to sit here and how you articulate your past and how you speak about things and your knowledge is, it's incredible.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
I know I get the imposter syndrome because I do have it from time to time, but from one person that's trying to do good in the world to the other person, I think you should be very, very proud.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that.
What you're doing. Yeah, it is incredible, mate.
Yeah, thank you. I do appreciate that. Those effects from the trauma, like, I'd always say to people, it is the most crucial thing is accepting that it is part of your journey in that process. Yeah. So like with me, OCD is a big thing. Struggle with OCD, PTSD. I used to struggle with a lot. I've worked through that quite a bit, and I don't.
How did you work through that?
So with PTSD, I had some counselling, talk therapy, and I thought that it wasn't that helpful at the time. And I still think I struggle with talk therapy quite a bit. Okay. And towards the end, it was a bit awkward. I'd just go in and like just talk about my day. I'd just be like, oh, I went to Greg's earlier, and you know what I mean. I wouldn't even like touch on the trauma or the the experiences. But But I think it did help because I'd never explored some of the areas that I did with the counsellor, like in terms of some of the darker parts of my story, the physical actions that happened. I'd never vocalised really, only in my police interview ever. So having that space to do that, I think, was good and helpful. And that's where the PTSD lied. It was kind of night terrors were quite bad, and I would find that if I drink, I'd go into sort of like, it was kind of not like seizures, it was kind of like emotional, I don't know how you describe it. I would go into like sort of delusions, and I would think my abusers were coming to get me, and that happened like 3 or 4 times. That was quite like shocking.
Do you not drink at all now then? Or?
I drink now and again, but it doesn't happen now because I've managed to sort
of work through it.
Yeah. And I know a guy as well who has non-epileptic seizures because of PTSD. So it's like the impacts PTSD has on the body is like just crazy. But yeah, I've managed to work through it, but it was mainly night terrors and sort of those panic attack type things.
But that's, again, it's to go through that trauma, like PTSD, not almost inevitable, but it's going to happen.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I think that's the thing that people underestimate about trauma, is that it is significant and it will live with you for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Like I have something in me that if I see a bridge, or if I see a rope, or if I see anything, it just fucking knocks me for 6. And I went through a period, it was when I started running the other business that I have now, and that came with obviously a lot more time and stress. And I went through a period of waking up in the middle of the night and reliving everything so vividly, and it knocking me for 6, which again, but like, it's going to happen. It's inevitable, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think allowing yourself to, when something like that does trigger you, allowing yourself a bit of space and time is important.
And that's something I struggle with. My partner always says to me, like, because I feel like I'm 100 mile an hour every day, all day. And then on a day when I don't feel like I'm 100%, it really winds me up. So I'm like, I should be doing this, or I should be doing that. She's just like, just fucking chill. Like, you're not going to be 100% or 100% of the time. It's just not, you're not human if you do that. And that's something I need to work on. But
I think it's easy. I don't know if you find it the same, but it sounds like something you explain, but I'll often pack my life. So in times when I'm more emotionally stressed or struggling with certain things, or I've had a few triggers, and that's like, you know, I'll pack my life even busier than what it would normally be. Do you know what I mean? To like escape it, and like I'd always be like, I'm running about and doing one thing, then doing another thing, and just finding something to do so I'm not on my own with my thoughts. Do you know what I mean?
That's the thing again, like my close friend from school, this was a bit ago now, we were both pretty pissed, and he was like, do you think you'd be as driven and as ambitious as you are if that had not happened to your brother? And I went, no, I don't think I would. I think my insecurity is that I always felt like I was a failure, and I felt like I'd let myself down and my family down because of the conversation I had and what happened to my brother. And I feel like that insecurity is what drives me to want to be successful, because I'm trying to prove something to myself.
But it's interesting because that insecurity is a negative. There's a negative connotation on it. But it drives you.
It's made me who I am.
I can relate to that a little bit, and I think that's what it is for me. I like to notice that purpose within the trauma. Like, would I take it back? That's such a hard thing. Like, I've had that asked to me before on another podcast. Would I take it back? It's so hard to answer that question, because part of accepting trauma, is that you accept that you can't go back and change it.
You can't control it, can you?
Yeah. If you're in that space where you're thinking, you know, would I go back and change it? You've not accepted it, because it's, do you know what I mean? So when people ask me the question, you know, it's a very hard one to answer, but I think I would say no now.
Do you have any regrets?
Maybe earlier on in my journey, I used to think maybe if I spoke out earlier, that young lad would have been saved. That's the only part of my story that eats me up. Like, maybe straight away, if I would have gone downstairs and gone, oh, he's just done this, maybe he still would have been alive. I don't know the dates. So for me, that's just a little thing in the back of my head that ticks away, you know?
Yeah, that hits me, that.
Yeah,
I think, again, with what happened to my brother, would I change what happened? And it's hard to say, because without my brother, there wouldn't be Tom's Talks. And, you know, the most fulfilling thing that's ever happened to me is somebody sending me a message saying, without you, I wouldn't be here. And yes, my brother died, which was awful, and I would give anything to see him one more time. But from one life lost, how many have been saved?
Exactly, yeah. How many, even just family members of people who are in your situation,
Yeah.
have heard your message? I mean, the reason I came across you is it just came up on my For You on TikTok.
Yeah.
And I was like, so what are you talking about? And I was like, yeah. So then I followed you on Instagram and that. And like, obviously my story includes bits of suicide. Like I nearly ended my own life and things like that. And obviously that young lad. So like, it touched me, and I, you know, just having people who were willing to be vulnerable, especially we've got these platforms now, and I said this earlier, but like there's such negative conversations about social media and its impacts, but we don't talk about the positive.
No.
There's such a community on your page of people that have been affected by mental health, suicide, depression, whatever it is. On mine, there's people from all across the world who message me and say, I'm 52. The one message, I'm 52. I was sexually abused when I was 8 years old. I've never told anyone ever. It's ruined my life. But after seeing your courage, I've just told someone today.
I love that.
Like,
that's what it's all about.
Exactly, yeah. That's and when you get those messages, that feeling you get of that, like this is making a difference. I'm doing something. It's what propels you, isn't it?
100%. There's nothing better. Like literally, there is, and I say this all the time from somebody that is driven and ambitious and with business, etc. But there's no amount of money that you can drop in your bank account that will ever equate to the feeling of somebody saying that you saved their life.
Yeah.
Or very similar to yourself in the respect of the messages that you may get.
Yeah.
Or that you do get.
And for me, like going back to that purpose side of things, sometimes it keeps me going.
Yeah.
Knowing that, you know, even though it's supporting all these other people, it keeps me going knowing that I have a purpose. And I try and encourage others, and it's part of like, there's like a counselling approach called logotherapy, and it's all about teaching people to find purpose in trauma. That's the whole centre of it. And I like that, you know, that idea, because I know without my purpose, on some days I probably wouldn't have, I would have struggled to keep going. But because I know, and the thing is as well, for other survivors out there who don't want to do what I do and share it publicly, that's not what I mean by having it as a purpose. Whether it's you say, oh, you know, I was sexually abused or physically abused, emotionally abused when I was younger, but that's given me such resilience and grit to get through the challenges now I'm older. That's finding purpose or finding some value in your story. And again, there's such sensitivity on like language used around it, and I struggle, you know, when I'm writing posts and stuff and I'm saying like find value in your abuse or trauma, people can sort of go, whoa, what you on
it's
about?
Like the context, isn't it?
Exactly.
You know exactly what you want to say, and the message.
But
that
also,
you want
even
to give.
just the message that I am saying is quite. People don't like it. They don't like that there can be some positivity taken from it, and they struggle to comprehend it because the experience is so painful and it takes so much from you. But I'm just going to keep instilling that thing because I know it's helped me, and I know that if people can really find just find some positivity you can take from it. Do you know what I mean? 100%. And then that's so healing. And again, I can vouch for it myself and work for it. You've got to work for it. You're not just going to find it. I mean, after I escaped abuse, I was 16, and I think the 3 months following was kind of a weird patch. But after that, I went into like a really deep depression, and I starved myself. I developed a bit of an eating disorder where I'd punish myself and I wouldn't eat because I felt like I didn't deserve it. I ended up in hospital with that, and you know, I was trying to take my life. I think it was around that period, or maybe a little bit later on. So I had that patch, is what I'm saying. I had that patch, and then developing the self-awareness and the ability to, again, find that meaning and purpose, or even just value in it, that all those years aren't taken away. Because the alternative to finding value in your story is just not even accepting, it's just looking at it as a waste of your life. That's not healing.
No.
It's not beneficial to anyone. It's not beneficial to yourself, and you lull in it then. You self-pity, and that's the kryptonite, isn't it? Like self-pity.
100%.
And it'll push you darker into that, and I know because I was there, push you darker into any depression or whatever mental health issue you're struggling with.
Do you not think though, like, every time I hear of it really, really cuts me up what you said about the lad that was a victim that taken his own life. It makes me emotional just thinking about it. It really, really cuts me up deep inside when I hear that somebody's taken their own life, or somebody or anybody has died. And every single time, the main thing I try and get from it is just perspective. And you've just said, don't waste your life. Like, life is so fucking short. is so short. It can go like that.
Yeah.
And I just think that how I want to live my life is just that embrace every single moment and don't let a day go by where you get to the end of the day and you've wasted it. And just be present with the people that mean the most. And it's just perspective.
It's something that people in the day-to-day life, I feel when you have a busy life, you can like forget those things, but that's the true importance of it. Like I have a weird sense of I have a weird sense of how finite my life is. And sometimes it can be a bit depressing, but also it makes me be as reflective as I am. And I think because of the experiences I've had and the people that, have been lost, I mean, the same for you, you can recognize that and say like life is so finite and we need to do what we can and prioritize the things that mean the most to us.
Definitely. Like my worst nightmare is getting to 90, 100 years old, looking back and thinking, oh, I could have done more.
Yeah.
And that's not just for me personally. I don't mean that, like some people might think, oh, financially. I don't mean that. I mean, I could have done more to help other people. I could have done more to give back. I could have done more to spend time with the people that mean the most. I could have done more to travel for experiences and stuff like that. Like, I just think, just fucking do it.
Yeah, exactly that.
Just do it.
And those, like, for me, I focus on those two things, but like that, the message that I leave behind, or I guess legacy that I leave behind, is quite something I think about quite a lot.
Does it mean a lot to your legacy?
A little bit, I think, yeah. And then also the experiences I have and the knowledge that I soak in. For me, like, I love just going to, like, conversate with people. Because I do photography and videography as well. I used to do this thing where I'd take my camera to a town centre and I'd just go around taking portraits of people. And the conversations that I'd end up having because of it was just great, because I managed to get an insight into another world. Do you know what I mean? And I think for me, those two things, legacy, purpose, and gaining experiences and knowledge is like things that do keep me pushing on and the things that I value.
Yeah, no, I love that, mate. What's next for you then, mate?
So we've got our charitable organisation Prevention Pathways growing at the minute. So within that, we provide training to children and youth workers at the minute, but we're extending to teachers and anyone who works with children and young people, pretty much, sports coaches, whatever it may be, providing active ways that you can encourage prevention within your groups. So what we focus on predominantly is what things do we need to put in place for children that will help them disclose abuse if it's happening, or help us recognise abuse if it's happening, which is something that isn't covered in traditional safeguarding. So that's working in that area. And another bit we're looking to push in the future is in-school educational support to trauma survivors or people who've experienced adverse child experiences, sorry. So what that is going into schools and pushing children and young people who've been through trauma to achieve the most that they can. I think in the UK, there's the waiting times issue and things like that with CAMS, but I think we do have a good emotional support system for those who have been through trauma compared to other countries. It's still not ideal, but it's okay. But we don't have anyone there, shouting for survivors of trauma to do the best they can and achieve the most they can. It's kind of like, you just survive and make sure you're steady. No, you can do more than that. You can push on, and that's the sort of thing I'm looking to do with that side of Prevention Pathways.
I love that.
And then, the Edge of the Bed page keeps growing. We're filming a documentary, which just tells the story of my story and the story of different survivors around Yorkshire, really. We've done 2 in Hull. We're going to do 1 in Rotherham. So it's quite local to here, so it's quite interesting.
Love it, mate. I think it's absolutely phenomenal that what you're doing. Like I said, I resonate with everything that you're doing from a standpoint of, not just surviving, using your trauma to help people in a significant way, which is exactly what you're doing. And I take my hat off to you. I respect you a hell of a lot, mate.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Just one last question for you. If you could go back to 8-year-old Ryan, that first time that you were sexually abused, what would you say to him?
I'd just tell him it's going to be all right. Like, things are going to work out. If I couldn't change the course, that's all I'd say. I'd say everything's going to work out and everything's going to be fine. When I go back to that period of my life, like I said, I was in that deep depression after I spoke out. I thought I'd be on, a street corner drinking out of a paper bag or something like that. I amounted myself to that. And then I would have never, ever imagined me to be where I am today. It might seem, you know, just like a normal life to anyone else, but I'm so proud of myself and that I can say this. And some days I struggle to recognise it, but I'm proud of myself to get to where I am despite what's happened, because I never, ever expected it. And some days I wake up and I'm like, oh gosh, you know, I've done all these things and I've grown this page, and, you know, like even just qualifying as a teacher recently, that's a big thing to me because I never expected it. But yeah, that's what I'd say.
I love it. I noticed when I was scrolling through your Instagram the other day that your abuser, he took his own life.
Yeah. That was it. I can't believe we hadn't even touched on that yet. Yeah, I just
realised that. No, I just thought then, I said I've got one last question, and then it came in my head.
Yeah. It's a whole complex, probably could stick this in earlier on, couldn't we? But
well, we've got to it now.
yeah, we've got to it now, yeah. So yeah, that came about. So after those years after I spoke out, it was under investigation.
Did he get sent down?
So the
investigation,
it's all right, yeah.
Sorry, I just jumped the gun.
No, it's all right.
Sorry, mate.
The investigation went on for 2 years.
Really?
And it was getting to the point where it was going to go to court. It was charged with it and was going to go to court. But I think it was like a week and a bit. He would have had his charges sent through the post for about a week. And then I got a phone call from the police officer that was leading the case. She said, I need to see you as soon as possible. So I was like, oh, that doesn't sound good. And so I drove back home, and I could see she was parked outside already, which I thought was also weird that she got there before even I got back home. And she was sat. She had been put on the case later on, I think a year after it started. And then the original police officer who I shared my story to was there as well. So I thought, why would both of them need to come? That's so strange. And so I got into the house, they came in, and there was like, oh, we have some bad news, I guess, and your stepdad Andrew has ended his own life. And it was weird because as I was driving back, I thought of that as being a reason that was going round. And even though I'd thought about it, it was still such a shock that they actually said it, because as I said, he was such a narcissist. I thought he would never do that. People think that suicide is a selfish act, but when you've been in that spot, you realise that you feel like it's very selfless. You feel like you're doing people a favour. You feel like
you don't want to be a burden to anybody else.
That's what it is, and that's what people say. You know, talk about how selfish suicide is, and if you look at it as an act, you know, it looks that way. But the person, you know,
when you're in that moment,
yeah, exactly that. So I thought he would never do anything like that because that's what I thought. But it comes back, I think the reason he did it was that control. He had to regain the control. He knew he was going down because he had other charges as well, which I didn't touch on, that came up during the investigation.
Right.
Through his computer and a few other things like that. Like things such as he had a camera in my room, secret camera in my bedroom that would film me all the time. And I found that when I was, I think I was about 13, 14 or something like that.
Do you know, from being 8 years old to 16 when you went to the police, is there an amount of times that you could say that it happened? Was it very frequent?
The sexual abuse, I couldn't even put a number on it. I couldn't even put a number on it. The physical abuse, there was only a few times where he'd like beat me up. I probably put it down to maybe like 3 or 4 times when it was like he'd like badly physically assaulted me. But yeah, the sexual abuse, there's no way I could put a number on it, especially because when I was so young, it happened every day after school.
Every day?
Yeah, or every time I got in the shower as well, sometimes multiple times a day. On holiday it was worse because I'd have to share a bed with him. And I have I have so much empathy for my younger self in those situations, because I remember being on holiday, I think it was in Mallorca, and it abused me in the shower while we were getting ready, and I was walking around, and like, even though, like I said, I didn't have a great understanding of what was going on, I felt so much shame, and I remember thinking that people that were looking at me knew what had happened.
Right.
Or like had seen what had happened somehow, and I had this like sense of like, oh, do they know, like, and I felt so dirty and ashamed, and yeah, that's just a memory that I have of one of the times. But going back to like when he took it in his own life, it was strange because the memories of the good times came up, not all those bad times, which was weird.
Right.
Because obviously lived with him since I was 8, so we went on holidays. There was good times in the home. Do you know what I mean? And again, that goes back to the confusion of an abused child's mind. They don't know what's going on because you're getting all these good days and these treats from this person, but yet they're doing that, and even when you understand what they've done, it's still confusing. So I was thinking about the good times, and I was like, I wouldn't say grieving for him, but I grieve for the person he pretended to be.
Okay.
And it sounds like thing, and it took a while for me to again rewire myself and saying, kind of like, no, remember like why you did that, why those things happen. And I said this other day to a good friend. I said, I wonder if he is one of those people who set his whole life up centered around the sexual abuse. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Or like, did he intend for this from meeting me, or did it just come up as a...
That's what I was going to ask you earlier was, do you think from when you went to the church, do you think that he had the conversation with your mum because he saw you?
I think so. And
it's fucking mental.
I remember I was speaking to a guy who had done, and he posts a lot online, I can't remember his at all, but he covers a lot of the dark web stuff that happens and child protection side of things for parents. And he discovered a manual. It was like literally the size of a book of how to abuse a child. And it was find a mother who is like impoverished, or is struggling financially, or some sort of vulnerability. Must have children. Dad must be out the picture. And like literally, it's a step-by-step guide on how to abuse a child within a family setting.
That's exactly what he did.
Pretty much on par with what he did.
Jesus Christ.
So, just knowing that, and knowing again what type of person he were, some of the things he did, like once he'd completely knocked me out. I'd never been knocked out before. I remember in his office, I remember everything just went black, and then I sort of started to come round, and then he was stood with a knife like that. And he'd never done anything like this before. This was so out of the blue. He'd physically assaulted me, but never brought a knife or anything like that. Pressed it like right here. And I'm laid down, I just come round, and he was like, and I remember he said something along the lines of, it could be this easy if you said anything. Or something along the lines of that, it could be this easy. And like, so I knew he didn't have empathy, and he didn't have, those emotions. So I think it was all a plan, and I think he intended it all. And again, more experiences throughout those years. Like, he had a tracker in my phone, again, the camera in my bedroom. And the thing is, one of them was like a live feed to the CCTV system we had in the garage. And I didn't know this till afterwards. One of them was in my webcam. So he had 2 angles in my bedroom of me. And like, imagine like knowing that you, as a teenage lad, someone was filming you throughout the whole time you was in your bedroom. Like the feeling that of that invasion that I had. And this is when I found it, I was a little bit older. And I remember trying to catch him out. So I laid in bed one night, and the webcam came on in the corner, and I could see the webcam light, when they have the little red lights. So I had like a big sort of TV screen that doubled as my computer screen. Yeah. And the webcam light came on, and I was like, that's weird, my computer, I'm not using my computer. So I like crawled under because I thought I was being hacked or something. Turn the screen on, look up, and the camera app is on my computer, and I can see my face. Then it quickly crosses off. So I'm like, what is going on here? I didn't mention anything, and it kept happening. And I started to think maybe it's him doing it, because he had this app, I think it's called TeamViewer, and you can see multiple computer screens that are linked to a network. So he was using that to connect to my computer, to click on the camera app to look through my webcam to see me and record me. Wow.
Was that used as evidence against him in the end?
Well, we don't know, because I didn't get to the trial. They keep it quite under wraps. I didn't know really much about the evidence. They told me a little bit, but I didn't know much about what they had. I knew that the camera exists, and I gave it all to the police, and we found some old boxes of hidden cameras and stuff in his garage, showed them all to the police. So yeah, it was like, when I went to catch him, the red light came on, so I ran downstairs as quick as I could, and he was on his phone, and his chair just faced where the bottom of the stairs were, and I could just look, and I could see my computer screen on his phone on the TeamViewer app. So he even had it on his phone where he could watch me. Wow. So, yeah.
That's crazy.
it's like full on lockdown, and I didn't even know it for a long time that my phone was being, you know, tracked. And
That's
yeah.
mental. Thank you for your time, mate. One last question.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
What would you have said to him the day before he took his own life if you had the opportunity, with everything that he went through?
I probably would ask him, when we went back to that conversation, of whether, you know, he did it for the sexual abuse, or whether he tried to be a dad and then, you know, his urges sort of happened. I'd probably ask him that, just out of intrigue myself, and just, it's just a question I have. And I think that's probably what I wouldn't ask him why, to be honest. I wouldn't ask him properly why, because I think it's, it's
quite clear.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's probably what I would say.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for your time. You've been so open and honest, and like I said earlier, I respect you massively for turning such tragedy and trauma into something positive. And I know that you're helping hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. So thank you.
I appreciate
very much.
that. Thank you. And thank you for the platform as well.
Cheers.